So as we all know, midterm grades are posted now, right? Everyone who is in this room is not beyond redemption, right? So, those of you who are still coming to class and doing the work, there is, nobody here is doomed to fail yet, right? Most of you are doing just fine. In fact, some of you may have noted that your grade might be a little bit lower than you expected it to be. In that case, it's probably because you might be missing an assignment or two. So here is what we're going to do about that, right? I am going to give people a chance to complete unfinished assignments and turn them in at the end of next week, right? Because I know that this is midterm, everybody's tired. This is the point at which students and their instructors are most frustrated with each other, right? So at the end of next week, you will have a chance to turn in any missing assignments, right? I will contact people who are missing stuff. I'll let them know what they still need to do, and then you will have a chance to make that work up. Now, if you're missing the fifth homework assignment, that was part of the paper assignment, so there's really no point in making that up. So what I will do instead is at some point in the next couple weeks, I will come up with an extra credit assignment that will be open to everybody, but it'll be worth 5 points to make up for those 5 points that some of you might have lost by missing the fifth homework. So does anybody have any questions about any of this? Okay, so with that out of the way, I do want to talk a little bit about the papers, with what people were doing well and where people were falling short a little bit. One thing I will say is, I was particularly impressed that you guys took what I said about actually quoting the texts to heart, right? Everybody was really pretty good on actually providing quotes, and most of you tried to work with the feedback that I gave you, so that was good. There were a couple of broad issues, though, that several people had that I would like to talk about a little bit. So the first issue, which was the kind of the more prevalent issue, I'm going to call the Relativist Thesis. So this is a thesis that looks kind of like this, right? You say something like, well, both sides have a point, or there are valid sides to all arguments, and you don't make a point of your own, right? Remember that you are supposed to be arguing for and defending a particular position. And it has to be a position that is generated from the source material that you're looking at, right? So you can't say everything's just more or less equal, or, well, they all suck, or whatever, right? You have to take a stance on something here. So that was what some of you had a little trouble with. The other prevalent issue I saw was the preconceived thesis or personal opinionist thesis. So this is where you had some idea of your own that had no real relationship to the material that you argued for, instead of generating a thesis from the texts themselves, right? So the way to get around this, the way to deal with this, is to think back to that exercise we did a couple weeks ago, right? Where I gave you all of those data points about urban and suburban areas, right? Okay. Guys, we start at 12:30. For some of you, this is pretty consistent, right? I'm a little tired of it. You know when you're supposed to be here. Make sure you are here at that time, right? Not that hard. Okay, where was I? Okay, so second big problem was this personal thesis. So think back to that exercise where I gave you those data points, and you were expected to try to build an argument from those. You're supposed to make a claim out of those data points, right? That's what you're expected to do with your papers, right? I want you to take the data that you are given and build a claim out of that, rather than trying to use that data to support some other claim that you already believe, right? That's what I'm looking for you to do, in part because that's what you're going to have to learn to do in future courses. Right? It's not because I'm trying to stop people from having their own opinions or from tamping down on particular opinions, right? This is all so that you do well on writing assignments in future courses. That's what the expectation by and large is going to be for you. So does anybody have any questions about this? Okay, then let's talk about the reading. So I posted a video for you to watch about Seneca, since I gave you Thursday to work on the paper instead of doing class discussion. Does anybody have any questions about Seneca, the reading for last time? It would probably help if we talk about that a little bit before we get into Frederick Douglass. Yeah, Kyle.
So was I not supposed to read the story?
Oh, no, you were. Yeah, you were still supposed to read Douglass for today. Okay. So just to give you a little bit of sort of quick background on the Seneca, go back and watch the video, but just to give us enough to work with today, right? So Seneca is a follower of a school of philosophy that was popular in ancient Greece and Rome called Stoicism. Does anybody know what Stoicism is or what a Stoic is? If someone is behaving stoically, what does that mean? What are you saying about them? Not so much brave, although it's kind of close. So someone who's behaving stoically, right, is somebody who is holding up without showing a lot of emotion in the face of some kind of danger or trouble, right? We usually describe someone as stoic if they have a lot of control over their emotions. So Stoicism stressed living in harmony with nature, and what this meant, on the one hand, was valuing reason over emotion, right? That your reason is a better guide to how to deal with life than your feelings are. And that the best way to live your life and to be happy is to learn to accept with patience that which you can't change. So Seneca talks a lot about wisdom. And this is by and large what he means by that, right? Learning to control your emotions in the face of difficult circumstances. So the only things he regards as worth knowing are the things that help you with this, right? So he lumps things into other categories. We've got vocational studies, which are things that help you make money. Right, practical skills, like carpentry, for example. Leatherworking, that sort of thing, right? And to those he opposes what he calls liberal studies. And liberal doesn't mean the same thing in this context that we tend to use it to mean, right? So liberal comes from the Latin word liber, which means free. So liberal studies are studies that are appropriate for a free person. That is, a person who is free from the need to have to work, right? So these, for Seneca, are things like literary studies, music, astronomy, mathematics. Basically, like, think about the kinds of disciplines you would study in a liberal arts program or a liberal arts college. Those are the kinds of things that Seneca is talking about, right? But he also regards these as not really contributing towards wisdom, right? These don't necessarily help you learn to accept the world around you with grace. But they're important building blocks in laying a foundation for learning things like wisdom, right? Now, Douglas is coming from a rather different perspective, right? Particularly in regards to this notion of freedom, right? So Seneca's notion of freedom is very much related to Hannah Arendt's idea of the vita contemplativa, right? That, life of the mind, right? That you can pursue if you're free from the need to have to work. What do you guys already know about Frederick Douglass? Have any of you read Douglass before? I will take your silence to mean no. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so you're not completely unfamiliar with him, right? So, but it's been a while. Okay, so what do you guys know or remember about Frederick Douglass?
He was a slave.
Yeah, he was enslaved, right? He was born into slavery. Anything else? Yeah, he escapes. And becomes an abolitionist. In particular, through the printed word, right? So not only does he write an autobiography, but he is also, the editor of an abolitionist newspaper. He prints pamphlets. He uses the power of the written word, right, to spread the idea about the abolition of slavery, right? So for him, literacy itself is an extremely powerful tool, right? And the attitude that he has towards literacy and towards these liberal studies is very, very different from Seneca's. And one of the reasons why I wanted to compare the two here is because of this notion of freedom, right? That these are the things that Seneca and his culture regarded as the proper provinces of free study, right? The proper activities of a free person. Because remember that Seneca came from a slaveholding society, right? So, how does Douglas relate the idea of freedom to the idea of literacy?
Well, he says like the being able to learn knowledge is freedom, because slaves basically being enslaved would be keeping away knowledge from the slaves.
Yeah, that's a big part of the process here, right? Is that slaves were not permitted to be educated, right? Slaves were deliberately kept illiterate. So if we look at the beginning of this on page 23, can I get somebody to read the first two paragraphs for us, starting with, I lived in Master Hugh's family about 7 years. Anybody?
I lived in Master Hugh's
Thank you,
family
Kaylee.
about 7 years. During this time, I succeeded in learning to read and write. In accomplishing this, I was compelled to resort to various stratagems. I had no regular teacher. My mistress, who had kindly commenced to instruct me, had compliant to the advice and direction of her husband, not only ceased to instruct, but had set her face against my being instructed by anyone else. It is due, however, to my mistress to say of her that she did not adopt this course of treatment immediately. She at first lacked the depravity indispensable to shut me up in mental darkness. It was at least necessary for her to have some training in the exercise of irresponsible power, to make her equal to the task of treating me as though I were a brute. Okay, so let's stop there and let's sort of think about this. Partly the language, I want to focus on the language choices here, but I also want to think about how this relates to some of the other things we've been reading, right? So, what does Douglas lack that most of the other thinkers we've been looking at say is necessary to education? Yeah, he doesn't have a teacher, right? He is having to do this mostly on his own. And this is in part because he belongs to a class of persons who are barred from formal education, right? So he has no, for him, to learn to read is to break the law. Now, I'd also like to think a little bit about some of the language he uses to describe the condition in which he's left here, right? So, what is this, that his mistress lacked the depravity indispensable to shutting me up in mental darkness? What does that sound like? Mental darkness, being shut up. How is he describing his condition here?
Kind of like how when someone, as you said, if you're in the dark about something you don't know anything, so they're keeping the knowledge, like the mental part of it, they're keeping it in the dark.
Okay, yeah, we often use the term keeping someone in the dark to refer to keeping someone ignorant, right? But this process of shutting up as well, what does it sound like is being done to him? Being shut up in mental darkness.
Somebody has him locked up.
Yeah, it sounds almost like he's like imprisonment, right? So ignorance here is associated directly with being enslaved or being imprisoned, right? Now this last sentence here as well, it was necessary for her to have some training in the exercise of irresponsible power to make her equal to the task of treating me as though I were a brute. Does everyone understand what he means by brute here? What's a brute?
Someone that's a pain.
We tend to use the word now mostly to refer to somebody who's not real smart, right? And who is, maybe strong, physically strong, kind of a bully, right? Brute originally meant an animal. So, an animal then being a creature that did not have the power of reason, right? It was for a long time believed that animals had no capacity for reason. Zoologists are starting to rethink that, but this was the common belief in Douglas's time, right? So he's arguing that his mistress is keeping him in prison, right, and is treating him like an animal. Now, if we look at this whole paragraph as well, how might this relate to some of the arguments of Sun Tzu and Mencius? I'm not arguing for any line of direct influence here. I'm not arguing that Douglas was actually familiar with Sun Tzu or Mencius, but I think there is a similar idea at work here. What has happened to his mistress to make her not want to teach him anymore?
Like the influence of her husband, changed the way she acts towards him?
Yeah. Her husband is a bad influence on her, right? And she, at first, right, lacked the depravity indispensable to doing this to him, right? And at first, she wasn't mean enough to do this, right? But she learns from the environment that she's in and the people she's around to behave this way, right? So we can connect this to Sun Tzu and Mencius. What did Sun Tzu and Mencius have to say about environment in shaping our sense of right and wrong, our sense of good and evil? Yeah. For Mencius, who thinks we're naturally good, right, then we need to remain in a good environment in order to cultivate that. For Sun Tzu, who thinks we're naturally bad, we have to put ourselves into a good environment with good associates in order to learn to be good, right? So yeah, both of them argue from different perspectives that environment is key to social formation and to learning, right? And so we see a learning process here working both ways, right? We see not only Douglas's process of learning how to read and learning freedom through literacy, but also the process working on his mistress, right? How she learns to be cruel from the people that she's around. Can I get somebody to continue here from my mistress was, as I have said, a kind and tender-hearted woman? Yeah, go ahead.
My mistress was, as I have said, a kind and tender-hearted woman, and in the simplicity of her soul, she commenced, when I first went to live with her, to treat me as she supposed one human being ought to treat another. In entering upon the duties of a slaveholder, she did not seem to perceive that I sustained to her the relation of a mere
chattel. So does anybody know what chattel is? Is that a word people need to explain to us? Okay, so chattel is a word that is used usually to describe livestock. Right? So it's an animal, but it's an animal that you own.
And that for her to treat me as a human being is not only wrong, but dangerously so. Slavery proved as injurious to her as it did to me. When I went there, she was a pious, warm, and tender-hearted woman. There was no sorrow or suffering for which she had not a tear. She had bread for the hungry, clothes for the naked, and comfort for every mourner that came within her reach. Slavery soon proved its ability to divest her of these heavenly qualities. Under its influence, the tender heart became stone, and the lamb-like disposition gave way to one of tiger-like fierceness. The first step in her downward course was in her ceasing to instruct me. She now commenced to practice her husband's precepts. She finally became even more violent in her opposition than her husband himself. She was not satisfied with simply doing as well as he had commanded. She seemed anxious to do better. Nothing seemed to make her more angry than to see me with the newspaper. She seemed to think that here lay the danger. I have had her rush at me with a face made all up of fury and snatch from me a newspaper in a manner that fully revealed her apprehension. She was an apt woman, and the little experience soon demonstrated to her satisfaction that education and slavery were incompatible with each other.
Okay, so this idea that education and slavery are incompatible with each other, we've seen before, right? From other perspectives, right? Arendt argues that the difference between the vita contemplativa and the vita activa traditionally is that the vita activa was what people who didn't have the resources to just sit around thinking all the time had to do, right? That Seneca has argued that the kinds of things that people do to make money or to make a living are not worthy of a free person, right? So, education and slavery being incompatible right, not a new idea here, but this is the first time that we've heard it expressed by someone who has an experience of slavery, right? What do you think Douglas means by this? What does it mean that education and slavery are incompatible?
Well, first off, they don't go together,
Mm-hmm.
but I think he's like saying in terms of like they're incompatible because it only works because you really don't know you really don't know about the world around you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Martha, you had a hand up too. What were you going to say?
I was going to say that you can't slave a free man, and in order to be free, you have education.
And why is it harder to enslave someone who is educated? Why is it harder for someone who is educated to be a good slave?
Because they can outthink you and they always find loopholes and things.
Oh yeah, on the one hand, yeah, they might be more clever than you, right? In fact, there are plenty of records of slaves who weren't educated who were still more clever than the people who owned them, right? But I think what Douglas is getting at here is that an educated person is more likely to be reflective and to think about their condition, right? And to compare their condition to those around them. So there is a French anthropologist, his name is Claude Meursault. I think I spelled his name correctly. And Meursault argues that there are basically two ways to think about the way slaves in a slaveholding society are treated. One is to consider the condition in which they're kept. And this is purely to think in terms of how people are treated, right? Are they fed? Are they not beaten? Are they treated more or less humanely? State refers to the simple legal status of the person as enslaved, right? The legal status of the person as property. And Mayasu says that we often get the two confused, and that we focus on how the slave is treated when we should be focusing on the state of slavery itself, right? And the particular injustice. So rather than trying to remedy the condition, what should be happening is remedying the state, right? And what's happening to Douglas as he learns to read is he becomes more aware of his state, right? He becomes more aware, if you could just please silence that, thanks. He's becoming more aware of the fact that he is an enslaved person whose horizons are limited, right? And he's becoming more aware of an outer world that is being kept from him. In fact, a newspaper in particular, right, is what sets his mistress off. Why a newspaper more than anything else? Why would a newspaper set her off more than a book? Yeah, if he's reading a newspaper, it's telling him about current events. It's telling him about what's going on right now, right? It's giving him more information about politics. Not just, whatever you can find between the pages in a book, right? So the fact that the newspaper actually is the kind of practical knowledge that somebody like Seneca would be contemptuous of, right? But that to someone like Douglas is vitally important, right? This is information he needs. Right, Seneca wouldn't care about current events. Right? How does knowing about current events help me accept my fate with equanimity, right? For Douglas, knowing about current events is essentially knowing about exactly the kind of arguments that are happening in the public sphere about the status of people like him. So it's a means towards freedom. In fact, what is his real aim in learning to write? If he is able to read and write, what will he be able to do?
Challenge the opponents.
In a very specific way, right? There is a very particular thing he will be able to do if he is able to read and write. If we look at the end of the excerpt here, if we look on page 26, right? I wished to learn how to write, as I might have occasion to write my own pass. I consoled myself with the hope that I should one day find a good chance. Meanwhile, I would learn to write. So, in order to escape his state, right? He needs a pass to get himself onto a ship. But he's not going to be able to buy one. And his master or mistress certainly isn't going to give him one, right? So what does that mean he has to do? Yeah, essentially he has to forge one, right? He has to commit a crime in order to escape. I mean, escaping itself is a crime, right? But forgery then is a crime on top of that. So essentially what he needs to do, is learn how to imitate what one of these passes look like. Right? He's got to learn to make the letters the proper way. So he has an extremely practical purpose right, for all the talk about, expanding his mind that goes on in this, right, which is, certainly not irrelevant, learning to read and write is a literal path to freedom for him. Because it allows him to trick the authorities. So, proceeds here. The idea as to how I might learn to write was suggested to me by being in Durgan and Bailey's shipyard and frequently seeing the ship carpenters, after hewing and getting a piece of timber ready for use, write on the timber the name of that part of the ship for which it was intended. When a piece of timber was intended for the larboard side, it would be marked thus L. When a piece was for the starboard side, it would be marked thus S. A piece for the larboard side forward would be marked thus LF. When a piece was for starboard side forward, it would be marked thus SF. For larboard aft, it would be marked thus LA. For starboard aft, it would be thus marked SA. I soon learned the names of these letters and for what they were intended when placed upon a piece of timber in the shipyard. I immediately commenced copying them, and in a short time was able to make the 4 letters named. So how is he able to begin his limited education in simply forming letters?
Pretty much his job.
It's not his job.
Well, he's watching.
Yeah. He's watching workmen, right? He's watching laborers at work making markings on pieces of timber as they're building ships, right? So all of this process is rooted here in practical application, right? Is rooted in practical experience in work. Okay, he's watching shipbuilders going about their trade. And just through observing them, he is learning to write. Like, he doesn't have a teacher, so he has to use any means he can get to get this information, right? Nobody's going to give it to him. So he starts in the kind of world that he is already admitted to, right? Sort of the world of working people. Now, how does he then supplement what he learned from watching the shipbuilders at work?
He started to challenge like the other, or the free kids that he met, like whenever he would run errands and say like, I can write more words than you. And then from within the world, he would practice himself.
Yeah, so he starts by working with these by watching these laborers, and then he tricks other children into teaching it. In order to finish learning the alphabet, right? I think this is something like that. Given that we've all been through a formal K-12 education system, right? We just kind of take this for granted. I mean, does it? Do any of you know a cognitively normal illiterate adult? Hardly anyone does anymore, right? We have more or less universal literacy thanks to compulsory education. But Douglas doesn't have the benefit of that. And because he is not of a class of people to whom education is open, he has to make do with what he can cobble together himself, right? He doesn't have the option of finding a teacher, like Sun Tzu would advise, right? And so he does use what's in his environment in order to learn. He is making the best possible. He is, in this way, fitting the definition that the Confucian thinkers give us of a gentleman, right? Is that he is making use of things. Remember Sun Tzu's bit about the difference between thought and study, right? What did Sun Tzu say was the difference between thought and study? Right? Think about the analogy that he uses when he talks about how, you can stand on your tiptoes and you can see a little bit further that way, right? But if you stand up on a mountain, you can see even further, right? What does that mean? What is he encouraging you to do?
Strive for more, for higher, like strive for better.
In a way, yeah. But there is a very specific message in that metaphor, right? If I'm standing on my tiptoes, am I relying on anything outside of myself? No, I'm just using my own natural abilities of my own body to stand a little bit higher, right? Now, how is that different then from climbing up onto a mountain?
It was basically like, well, climbing up onto the mountain would be like using another resource to see it. So
Exactly.
In that sense, like thought will be your own brain, which you already know, and studying will be furthering your knowledge to learn more.
Yeah, thought is just sort of sitting there grinding away in your own head, right? Mulling over what you already know, what you've already got. Right? Like standing on your tiptoes, or not using anything that I don't already have. Well, study is taking things that other people have already written, work that other people have already done, and using that to enhance your own understanding, right? So this is why Sun Tzu argues that thought is better than study, right? The gentleman, he says, is the person who knows how to make use of useful objects. The mountain, the book, the carriage, the boat, right? Why swim down the river when you can take a boat? And that's exactly what Douglas is doing. He is taking and making use of everything that's available to him in order to achieve this singular goal, right? Now, once these little boys have taught him the rest of the letters, right, it's not enough to just know the letters to forge a pass, right? You have to be able to write calligraphy. You have to be able to write in italics. So, by this time, at the bottom of page 26, my little master Thomas had gone to school and learned how to write and had written over a number of copybooks. These had been brought home and shown to some of our neighbors and then laid aside. My mistress used to go to class meeting at the Wilk Street Meeting House every Monday afternoon and leave me to take care of the house. When left thus, I used to spend the time in writing the spaces left in Master Thomas's copybook, copying what he had written. I continued to do this until I could write a hand very similar to that of Master Thomas. Thus, after a long, tedious effort for years, I finally succeeded in learning how to write. So, the other thing that he's making use of here is two different kinds of empty space, right? On the one hand, time. When his mistress goes to church and leaves him in charge of the house, there's no one watching him, right? He's free then to do what he wants. The other empty space he's filling is the blank pages in the copybook that his master and mistress's son has finished with at school, right? So a lot of what he's doing here can be read as just trying to squeeze into these spaces where he's not technically welcome, right? Appropriating space for himself in which to learn. And it's also important the way he sums up the process at the end here, right? Thus, after a long, tedious effort for years, I finally succeeded in learning how to write. Why do you think he makes a point of calling this a long, tedious effort that lasts for years? I mean, apart from the fact that it's simply true, right? Why draw attention to the length and tediousness of the process? What is he trying to demonstrate to a reader here? Sure that it takes time, right? But remember his specific situation, right? And his particular concerns with freedom, right? Why does it take him, maybe the question isn't so much why does it matter that it takes such a long time, or why does it matter that it takes him such a long time? What is the message he's trying to get across by telling you that it took him a long time? Why did it take him such a long time? Pardon?
The difficulty of like what he had to do. I mean, it's like it took him a while to.
Well, he's not free, so.
Yeah, he's not free. He's technically not allowed to do this, right? He's breaking the law by doing it. And he's got to cobble everything together by himself, right? So, because he's intelligent and persistent, he's able to do it, right? But I think one of the things that he's trying to demonstrate here is how absurdly difficult this process is, right? How resourceful you have to be to make it on your own this way without a teacher, right? Little Master Thomas can go to school and write his little copybook, right? Douglas can't do that. He's writing in the dirt with a stick or on fence boards with a lump of chalk, right? No one is teaching him to do this. He's watching shipbuilders put labels on timber and having to make the connections himself, right? Through inference. So on the one hand, he is demonstrating that it is possible for someone to learn to do this, right? For someone to learn to write this way. But he's also showing his mostly white, well-educated readers that they're taking this for granted, right? This is something he had to fight for tooth and nail and claw his way up for, right? Whereas they just get it from their parents or at school. So literacy for him is, it's more than just the ability to communicate, right? It's a literal path to freedom. And it's something that he had to acquire through intense effort, right? Now, I want to also look at how he uses sort of the process of learning to read to form an idea of his condition, right? If we look on page 24, can I get somebody to read the paragraph that starts, "I was now about 12 years old."
I was now about 12 years
Thank you,
old,
Carl.
and the thought of being a slave for life began to bear heavily upon my heart. Just about this time, I got hold of a book entitled The Columbian Orator. Every opportunity I got, I used to read this book. Among much of other interesting matter, I found in it a dialogue between a master and his slave. The slave was represented as having run away from his master 3 times. The dialogue represented the conversation which took place between them. When the slave was retaken the 3rd time, In this dialogue, the whole argument in behalf of slavery was brought forward by the master, all of which was disposed of by the slave. The slave was made to say some very smart as well as impressive things to reply to his master, things which had the desired, though unexpected effect, for the conversation resulted in the voluntary emancipation of the slave on the part of the master.
So what is it that makes this particular dialogue that he sees in this book appealing to him?
Is it the conversation the slave had with his master after being caught the third time?
Yeah, yes. What is it that makes that appealing to him?
Oh, after their conversation, the master basically emancipated the slave and let him become free.
Okay, part of it's the result, right? So think about the way he describes this process happening, right? How does the slave win his freedom from the master?
I guess he used the word.
Yeah. He makes smart arguments, right? So what Douglas sees in this dialogue, right, is someone like himself, in the same state as himself, making ingenious rhetorical arguments and getting the desired result, right? So this is something that provides a kind of model for his own possibilities, right? That if I can learn to make persuasive arguments, then I can earn my freedom too. That this is not impossible. Now, ultimately, that's not how he does, right? You know, he does so through trickery, but a lot of that trickery is also based on persuasion, right? And this does at least make him aware, like it gives him a model of someone who is like himself, who is intelligent, right? Who's smart enough to be able to make these kinds of arguments. Now, if we look on the next page, page 25, can I get somebody to read, starting from, I often found myself regretting my own existence. Someone who hasn't read. Yeah, Martha, go for it.
I often found myself regretting my own existence and wishing myself dead, and but for the hope of being free. I have no doubt but that I should have killed myself or done something for which I should have been killed. While in this state of mind, I was eager to hear anyone speak of slavery. I was a ready listener every little while I could hear something about the abolitionists.
Mm-hmm.
It was some time before I found what the word meant. It was always used in such connections as to make it an interesting word for me. If a slave ran away and succeeded in getting clear, or if a slave killed his master, set fire to a barn, or did anything very wrong in the mind of slaveholders, it was spoken of as the fruit of abolition. Hearing the word in this connection very often, I set about learning what it meant. The dictionary afforded me little or no help. I found it was the action of abolitioning, but then I did not know what was to be abolished. Here I was perplexed. I did not dare to ask anyone about its meaning, for I was satisfied that it was something they wanted me to know very little about. After a patient waiting, I I got one of our city papers containing an account of the number of petitions from the North, praying for the abolish of slavery in the District of Columbia and of the slave trade between the states. From this time, I understood the word abolition and abolitionist and always. Always drew near when the word was spoken, expecting to hear something of importance to myself and fellow slaves.
Okay, you can stop there. Thank you. Okay, so what's happened with the process he describes here, like what is he learning in this paragraph?
He's learning about the word abolition.
Yeah, he's learning about the meaning of the word abolition, right? What makes this word interesting to him when he still doesn't know what it means?
He says a part in there when a slave will get free, that slave owners would say that it was something towards the abolition, like something involving when the slaves got free, that they used that word.
Yeah, it's context, right, that clues him in to the fact that there's something I need to know about this word, right? There's something interesting about this word. But he can't quite pull its meaning from the context in which he usually hears it, right? Because what is the context in which he usually hears it? Who does he usually hear it from?
Newspaper he usually hears it from?
Well, he figures out what it means from the newspaper account, right? Who does he usually hear using this word in conversation when they're blaming things on it?
Slave master?
Yeah, that's the context in which he usually hears it, right? He hears the slave owners talking about it. So by this point he can read, so he can look it up in the dictionary. But the dictionary definition doesn't reference the context at all, right? The dictionary tells him what the literal meaning of the word is, but not the meaning of it in the context in which he's been hearing it. And what can't he do to learn what it means?
You can't ask.
Yeah, there is no one he can ask safely to learn what this word means, right? Because he's seen that it's clear that they don't want him to know what it means. And so he has to use those resources available to him again, right, to figure it out again from context from a newspaper. I think this is another example of what makes newspapers so important and so dangerous in Douglas's account, right? It's from newspapers that he learns much of what he knows about the world. And it is to newspaper publishing that he will go once he is free, right? This is the medium he will make use of to promote, the same ideas applied to others. So I think one of the things that we can note about Douglas's argument that makes it important in the broader scheme of the kinds of things that we've been talking about is how class dependent and how background dependent some of the notions of education we've been talking about are, right? That Douglas is someone who doesn't have the option of living, the contemplative life, right? But that doesn't mean that he doesn't want to have any kind of life of the mind, right? That he doesn't want to, have a life devoted to thought. That he doesn't want to educate or better himself. And what we see here is ways in which education can be applied to an extremely practical purpose, right? And not just education in like not just vocational education, but sort of ways that you can connect the dots between vocation, between work people are doing, right? And improving your own mind. So does anybody have any questions about this? Does anybody have any questions about anything at all? Okay, so I will be sending emails out this week letting people know what work they're missing to give people a chance to make it up. In the next couple of weeks, I will also be putting out that extra credit assignment to make up for assignment 5 if people missed it. But yeah, if you have questions about stuff that you're missing, if you have questions about anything else, just please let me know, okay? All right, so we'll see you on Thursday.